You know, when the disclosure came out, you know, and it's come out in several phases. There was an original article in a aviation magazine from the year 2015 that is really where this current story comes from, where you have a much clearer picture of the original data and the way this whole thing got disclosed. So I'm going to show you some things that you probably are definitely not even aware of. And so we're going to share my desktop with everybody. And we're going to actually look at the photographs of the original UFO. So the original UFO, which they call the Tic Tac, this incident was about 100 miles off the Pacific coast of San Diego. So you have the U.S. Navy is out there, and this has been going on according to the original article in Fighter Suite magazine for several weeks. So they had been watching fleets of these things for several weeks. And the Navy radar, the limitation of the range of the radar was about 80,000 feet. So they would see these things come in from 80,000 feet in a matter of seconds, just drop. And they said seconds in the Fighter Suite magazine interview from 2015. You know, so we're looking at over 2 years ago, because now we're in the beginning of 2018, and this is November of 2015. So you're looking at, you know, the end of 2015 coming into 16. So just over 2 years ago. And so when you fall 80,000 feet in 5 seconds, that comes to about 10,000 miles an hour. So right there you have to understand something, that the G forces on a pilot are so severe at even 1,000 miles an hour, which would have been 10 times that. So if it's 5 seconds that they fell 80,000 feet and just stopped on a dime above the water is key, 100 miles plus off the coast. And the G-forces would liquefy the pilot's body. It would destroy the pilot's body even at 1,000 miles an hour on a sudden stop. Because nobody, you know, Mach 1 is about 700 miles an hour, the speed of sound at sea level. So a pilot can't actually stop at Mach 1 on a dime. You can't even stop in 2 seconds at Mach 1. So when you understand that when they said seconds, you're talking about 10,000 plus miles an hour. I calculated it. So and also structurally, the UFO itself, with the metal, like if you look at the way Boeing makes aircraft, and I've looked at these things up close in air shows, you know, the B-1, you know, the stealth fighters, and the framing is ribbing and aluminum and alloys, different types of alloy metals. I'm telling you, the structure of the craft would implode in on itself and crumble into a ball if it stopped at 10,000 miles an hour, and it would destroy the pilot. So the first thing you have to understand is the pilots, the Navy pilots, tried to tell the newscasters this. They were trying to tell them, we don't have anything like this on our planet, and neither do the Russians. And we don't have any means of propulsion that can do anything like this. So, and the newscasters didn't seem to get it. They, you know, and even To the Stars Academy, Tom DeWong is trying to tell the president from inside sources that this could be the Russians. No way. No way. And if you go back to my early work in my first film, Evidence, the Case for NASA UFOs, I lay out a galaxy clock wave model that shows how you can reduce the mass gravity effect of a spacecraft by a different means of technology, so that the pilot and the craft weigh in as light as a photon. So a photon, a particle of light, guess what escapes gravity all day long? So you throw something up, it comes back down. Everything gets pulled in by the Earth's gravity or the sun's gravity or a black hole's gravity, supposedly. There's one thing escaping Earth all day long, and that's photons. They hit the surface of the Earth, and they go racing back out into space at the speed of light, just a tad over 186,282 miles per second. So the thing about a photon is when its mass is zero, it can bounce off the walls. It can behave the way these UFOs behave, and including a sudden acceleration. So we see at the end of the video, of the infrared video. Let me just pull up an image of the infrared video, and we see that there's two pieces of video actually. And the interesting thing about the video is it shows infrared photography. So let's look at a moment of what we're actually looking at, and look at, I'm actually trying to find the image here of the infrared FLIR. Here it is, FLIR 1. So this is an image of a forward-looking infrared camera on an aircraft, and it's important to look at this. I hope everybody can see this. And you can see a fighter jet. The particular fighter jets that the Navy was using in this case measure at 60 feet 3 inches. And the Tic Tac UFO, which we have one picture of, is about 40 to 46 feet. I check all measurements. I look at all reports. I don't just look at one report and think that it's accurate fact checking. So if one report says 40 feet, which is about as long as a gray whale, and the other report says 46 feet, then I take both, because you have two reports and we don't know where they come from. So in comparison, it's just a little bit shorter than this fighter at 60 feet 3 inches. But notice how we can, the infrared photography, the forward-looking infrared can see the exhaust as white. Because everywhere you have energy, you have heat. And the heat turns out white on the infrared mode on the camera. So when you go to your UFO, forward-looking infrared, now this particular image is very interesting because this one, we're out of infrared. You can see up here, this is visible light, but notice we see a corona of charged, what is probably ionic charged particle light emissions. An ion is an electron, an atom with an extra electron on it, an extra charge, either positive or negative. So you have negative and positive ions, which is an atom with an extra electron. So it becomes an unbalanced electron emitter. So when you get a lot of ionization of the skin of the UFO, it starts to emit electromagnetic energy because it's so charged. And this is in the visible. Now when we go to also notice, very important, we're at 25,000 feet here, approximately, according to the data on the forward-looking infrared cameras. And you know, I'm a member of the FAA. I'm a skydiver with over 300 jumps, and I did high altitude skydiving training at Edwards Air Force Base. And when you do high altitude training, you become very knowledgeable about what pilots go through. One very important fact is the temperature at 25,000 feet in November in San Diego is going to be minus 50, minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Extremely cold out there. So what does that tell you? It tells you that in infrared, everything that doesn't have energy is going to be black, dark grays to black. So again, we're in visible mode right now. So, and of course, minus 60, minus 50, you know, there's no way you're looking at a duck. Even though ducks can fly that high, Canadian geese have been spotted rarely that high, but this thing is 40 feet across, 46 feet. So there's no way it's a duck. It can't be a weather balloon, because a balloon, and there's been reports and claims that this is a freaking balloon. A balloon does not have an ionized magnetic field around it. And this is not a reflection, because a reflection is a hot point. So when you look at reflections on metallic surfaces or even a balloon, you're going to get a hot single point. But this is a uniform ionic magnetic field. So that's not a reflection coming off the surface, because it's also reflecting off the bottom. It's reflecting at all angles. So that rules out reflections. It rules out balloons. And also balloons can't fly against 120 knot winds, the pilot is saying, 120 nautical mile winds. So that's not going to work either. So this is my double image. So these are the two modes right here that the camera goes into. And you see the white is the infrared. We're in infrared right here, right? So the white means it's hot, and you'll see that you can actually see the inverse, the black halo, which is on the right, is illuminated as white. And so we can see that halo has a differential comparison in temperature to the background of the environment. So it's actually cold light, and it's pure white, but there's no exhaust. So if it had this been a type of jet or even an ionic propulsion system, and ionic propulsion systems, I had a conversation recently with an MIT physicist who's in his 80s, Bogdan Maglich, who's a nuclear fusion scientist that I personally worked with for over 15, 20 years. And I still have access to him. And I once actually got a meeting with Maglich and the head of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission under 3 presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. This is the man, Glenn T. Seaborg. And Seaborg, this is Seaborg right here, was a Nobel Prize winner and the co-discoverer of the explosive plutonium isotope used in nuclear weapons. He was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission under those 3 presidents, authorized all the nuclear testing, including the Nevada test site nuclear rocket propulsion systems, called NERVA. And they were testing nuclear rocket propulsion to send spacecraft to Mars with a company called EG&G. And EG&G was under contact with Department of Defense, and according to my reports from EG&G, which are no longer available online, I have them printed right here from the early days, the tests on nuclear propulsion were successful in the year 1968 at the Nuclear Rocket Development Station in Nevada, operated by EG&G, Phobos 2A, and notice that Phobos is the name of Mars' moon. 2A, the most powerful nuclear reactor yet developed for space propulsion, is successfully tested. Successfully tested. So what does that tell you? In 1968, we had nuclear ion propulsion systems. And so when I was working in fusion with Bogdan Maglich, you see, we were in conversations that I personally directed with Earl Van Landingham, who was the director of all propulsion at NASA. Dr. Earl Van Landingham. I spent hours on the phone with him. Brilliant, brilliant scientist who becomes head of all space access and all technology for NASA. And you're talking probably the most intelligent person at NASA. And believe it or not, I told Glenn Seaborg in person at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab about my UFO sighting in Berkeley in 1968, which from the village at Berkeley, where my father was getting a degree in psychology, a PhD, that this lab, what's known as the space lab at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, would have a perfect view of the flying saucer. I described to Seaborg how the saucer hovered, how there were no emissions, there was no thrust, and there was no noise. And he did not tell me that I was crazy. His assistant, Albert Giorso, who was sitting next to him, said that Seaborg had access to 37 levels above top secret. And Seaborg told me he had never heard of any propulsion systems like that. And he said if you could attain anti-gravity, you would be far beyond the need to have nuclear fusion power, which Bogdan Maglich was developing. and Magwitch was sitting with us having lunch outside on a picnic table. And I was pointing to him where I saw the UFO and how it behaved. So with 37 levels above top secret, apparently he didn't know. But we do know that they had a successful nuclear ion propulsion drive in 1968, which was so powerful you could get to Mars in no time, which means we could technically already be at Mars. And we could be using the modern day versions of that program. But the public was told that it was not successful, but it says right here on my research from, I did this in the 1990s, this research, and that's when I printed that out, was in the 1990s, that they were successful with nuclear propulsion. So Earl Van Landingham was interested in Magwitch's fusion because it produced 18 million electron volt charges on protons. And protons are heavy propellant mass, even though those were helium protons, meaning they're not that heavy. And Magwitch told me if you could have uranium charged particles and fire them out of the back of a drive, you'd have a super fast propulsion system. Now here's the problem. With super fast heavy ion propulsion systems, Earl Van Landingham told me that even with the helium protons at 18 million electron volt charges, we could do 1/10 the speed of light. That's 67 million miles an hour. 67 million miles an hour. But he said you can control the speed by opening up a lens, letting out more and more of the charged particles, or less and less and less. So Earl was very aware and very interested in the success of helium-based fusion, and so was Glenn Seaborg. However, with heavy ion propulsion systems, you could cause a craft to hover, but in the infrared, those charged particles would show up as thrust. And in this case, on the FLIR camera, the UFO does not show any of that. The other problem is with sudden acceleration and deceleration, you would destroy the pilot and the materials, unless you move on to a material called graphene. And graphene is a newer discovery, 200 times stronger than steel, 200 times. But you can also look at some really good carbon materials, because diamond is essentially carbon, and you can get some really good, very lightweight materials for spacecraft that can withstand a huge amount of G-forces. But the problem is the pilot can't, unless you understand the propulsion systems I'm talking about. I'm talking about a totally different technology, one that uses a magnetic field in combination with frequencies to cancel out the mass gravity effect first. And once your mass gravity effect is 0 on your craft, guess how much energy it takes to even go the speed of light? A couple of volts and a couple of amps, not even 1 amp. So volts times amps is watts. So essentially, when you're looking at this UFO here, we're seeing the white on the left. So that means there's real energy there. It's 25,000 feet. So your background temperature is going to be -50, -60 degrees. So the fact that you're seeing white there means there's considerable energy to combat that background temperature to show up as white. It's not reflected sunlight temperature because it's uniform. A reflection is spot point. So you're not looking at reflection. And again, it's the shape of the Tic Tac. So this is the same UFO, the Tic Tac. So let's go down here to Tic Tac, and that's it. Now, when I put this thing up in Photoshop, I took it out of the Fighter Suite magazine article, the original article. And remember, there are a great number of these. They can also withstand huge, again, when you go up into space, you lose pressure. You lose pressure. So materials behave differently in space. The temperature in absolute space is -273 degrees centigrade. So, materials freeze. But notice the shape of this. Can anybody tell me, does that look like a whale to you? So let's look at the tail. The tail has actually got 1, 2, 3 faces. right? We got 3 faces on this tail, and possibly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and possibly 6. It's hard to see in the geometry, but both sides look like a tail. And notice the midsection is curved. It has an arc to it, which is what you do when you make a ship. You create a slight arc. And then you have this long, narrow midsection, and then you have a head. And the head has 1, 2, 3 faces per side. So it's a hexaform, meaning 6-sided form. So it's possible the tail and the head are 6-sided, although the head looks different than the tail. So you might wonder, because this thing is about the length of a gray whale, but this thing has structure. If you look down in below the surface, it even looks like there, you see this reflection here? This is an energy field. Literally ionic, very highly charged particles, possibly even ionizing the surrounding atmosphere of what they call the Tic Tac. And on the very low level, it looks like you might even have portals or windows. Although the pilots say they didn't see any windows on this thing, when you zoom in on the photograph, it looks like ribs down in the lower section. But it's shaped like a fish. Now, if you can move like this, and you can see in the end of, there's 2 pieces of video. On the second piece of video, at the very end, the thing just bolts. It takes off. Again, the sudden acceleration at those speeds would destroy any pilot today. So even if you had the advantage to have a heavy ion thrust propulsion system, you have to let those charged particles go out slowly and accelerate in a proportion to what the pilot's body can withstand. So I don't believe anybody on Earth has this capacity. Now I want to point out, because I actually, at this point, you have to go beyond science. You have to think like an archaeologist or an artist at this point. When I say this thing looks like a fish, it looks like it's meant to perform underwater, as well as when it leaves the water, it doesn't seem to be aerodynamic in its shape. It doesn't need to be aerodynamic because it's not using wings to fly. We know that a fish has little wings, the little wings here. It has a dorsal, it has the tail. I don't see a dorsal on this thing. So I'm not saying it's a living whale that can fly at incredible speed. I'm saying it's shaped like something that could function underwater. Okay, even a submarine has a tail and a head. So I'm saying that we can look artistically now, and I don't believe science should be taking the entire stage in the cases of ufology and on the cases of consciousness and everything. I think science is trying to trump everything and say that we can explain everything with science, and I absolutely don't believe you can explain everything with science. I mean, there are certain limitations to science, but I'm the first one to say, and I've said it on another radio show, that this thing looks like the structure of a whale or of a giant fish at 46 feet. Gray whales can be 38 to 40 feet. So if I were a whale swimming under the ocean and I saw this thing next to me, I would think, it's the same size as me. But yet, to get data to support what I'm about to tell you, where I think these beings are from, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a mystery. You can look at Robert Temple's book, The Serious Mystery, which I might have back here somewhere. In Robert Temple's book, The British Astronomer, The Serious Mystery, documents a very good case for the arrival of merman type gods. The Greek god Oins, who's the Babylonian god A, who has even earlier Middle Eastern different names, is half fish, half human. And he brings math, astronomy, and architecture to the human race thousands of years ago. Okay, so we call that a myth because we don't have any scientific proof of mermaids. So we tell each other. So we tell each other. And this is where you have to go into a different direction. This craft, the Tic Tac, could function very well underwater with this shape. It could possibly even float on the surface. Now remember, the pilot is describing how this thing got near the surface of the water, and he would see foaming in the water, swirling, as if there is a heavy magnetic field that is disturbing the water. And the salt crystals in the water would respond very well to a very powerful magnetic field. Absolutely they would. And so you might see disturbances in the water. So I'm looking at all the data, and I find the Fighter Suite magazine article is the most interesting one, because I noticed how even the descent from 80,000 feet to right above the sea, in the New York Times, they said it eventually settled from 80,000 feet to right above the sea. Now, the original article said that happened in seconds. So you see the difference in the data? You know why they said it eventually settled? Because they can't accept the G-forces on a drop from 80,000 feet. So you have 5,280 feet in a mile. Do the math. You're at 10,000 miles an hour in 5 seconds. And even if it was 10 times less than that, and you're at 50 seconds. Now, they said seconds. You know, they didn't say a minute or less. They said seconds. So that means very quickly. And I would like to question the pilot on exactly what he meant by seconds. 1 second, 2 seconds, because then I can really get a velocity on the descent of these craft. So Robert Temple in the Sirius Mystery. So you can see what I'm going to show you now is what he called the Dogon tribe in Africa believes that these beings, and they called them the Nomos, and there's a squirrel. You're looking through a lot of stuff in my desktop here, which is kind of funny stuff. So you're looking at what Robert Temple called the Nomos. Here we go. So there's a depiction by the Dogon tribe in Africa. Now, the Dogon tribe in Africa were keepers of pre-dynastic Egyptian knowledge on the beings from the star system Sirius, whom Robert Temple called basically mermen type of ETs that flew in aquatic spacecraft that needed water to survive. So this is their symbol for the Nomos. It looks like a flying saucer with a fish's tail. And notice the flying saucer is floating on the surface of the water. Now we come back to Tic Tac here, and we see a bow-shaped structure. It's getting very, I don't know whether this photo was taken looking up in the sky or down as it was hovering above the surface of the Pacific. I don't know where their cameras were pointed. That's another question to get data on. But nevertheless, you have a fish's tail, and we know that this thing hovered above the water. And Sirius is approximately 8.3 light years from here, and its companion star Sirius B is almost the same circumference as the Earth. It's so close. We're practically twins to Sirius B, the B star, which is made of a type of diamond that's harder than our diamond on its surface. So, because it's a heavy star. And the Dogon priests say that the A and the B star of Sirius revolve around the main star every 50-point-something years. A very important number there, actually. So we have a connection. Now we're using art and archaeology to make a connection to our current visitors. Now the other interesting thing about the undersea world is, first of all, remember, it's the Navy that spotted these things. And they had been watching them for weeks, according to the Fighter Sweep article. And so these two pilots come in that that suddenly, you know, appear on the scene, and they tell us a story in the New York Times that says something a little bit different, but we don't have the whole story. You've got to look at everything these guys say, because I've watched media interview these pilots and try to laugh it off. I've seen them completely ignore the data and the hard facts, completely ignoring it. You can't do that. Now, the first thing he tries to say is the word drone. Okay. Now, again, you're at 25,000 feet, and you have, this is 40 feet wide, and it drops from above 80,000 feet, the extent of the radar, down to the sea, just above the surface of the ocean in seconds. No drone can do that. You know, manned or unmanned, no drone can do that. And then the sudden acceleration on one of the pieces of video is too sudden for a drone. Again, massive energies in the form of heavy ion propulsion could get us to Mars in no time. And we have proof of that right here. Okay, I'm going to show you this because this is my EG&G. You can see EG&G. This is, what is the date on this when I did this search? This is their history from 1960 to 1970. And we had a successful Phobos 2A, the most powerful nuclear reactor developed for space propulsion, is successfully tested. Okay, 1968. That was the year I saw the UFO in Berkeley, 1968. Except it was a saucer, and it was metallic with no rivets, and it didn't make any noise and didn't have any thrust that we can know of. So in the New York Times article, there's a few things different, but and also the New York Times, they don't show the color photography of the Tic Tac. Now, one thing in the history of ufology you have to understand. Now remember, Glenn Seaborg tells me in person that there, with 37 levels above top secret, these are all pictures of Seaborg. And when I knew him, he was a much older gentleman. Probably he looked more like this when I knew Seaborg. And I drove in the car with him one day to take him to the airport in Orange County after a huge meeting that I had set up the head of Southern California Edison Utilities to meet with Magwitch and Seaborg to see if they were going to fund us for our nuclear fusion technology. And the scientist they sent there, Glenn Duckett, was in utter awe of the men in the room that we were working with. And so there's Seaborg telling me, without laughing, that I saw a UFO that was performing in a way that was beyond all science that he had access to. So let's look at what he has access to, because Congress is doing something different in the current case, right? So Congress, Senator Harry Reid and 3 other senators decide to fund a UFO investigation and start supplying photography from the Navy and incident reports from the Army and the Air Force to a company, a private company run by Bob Bigelow. So Bob Bigelow goes public on 60 Minutes and says that he believes there are aliens right here, right now. He said, you don't have to go anywhere to see them because they're living here on the planet. And I, right there on that statement with Bigelow, see, I have a history with Bigelow, because when I came out with my film, Evidence, the Case for NASA UFOs, his people contacted me. Colin Kelleher contacted me and wanted to see all my data, all my films, and hear my theories. He wasn't a very good physicist, nowhere near the caliber of the physicist that I had access to. And he couldn't understand my galaxy clock. I think it was way over his head. I took physics in school, and to such a degree that when I presented my physics teacher with a time dilation theory on paper, mathematically, he was utterly astounded because he said that's Einstein's time dilation, but mine was different than Einstein's. It was very similar. Mine showed that time was proportional to gravity, whereas we measure time proportional to the speed of light. I found that cells age quicker in a stronger gravitational field, and they age less the further they get away from gravity. So nevertheless, I have a background, my own background in physics and my own background in mathematics. And so there we go. I believe these things, according to Bigelow, are living on our planet and under the sea. And I believe it's very, very likely this particular, remember, this is only one case, you know, that has brought us to disclosure, to admit that the Pentagon is authorizing a private aerospace contractor, Bob Bigelow, who makes balloons that can carry passengers and supplies to the space station, that he would get the job and hire Louis Elizondo and others to investigate cases and reports like this. And his physicists are, you know, limited in what they can understand. I know that because I dealt with them personally, and I was amazed how quickly Colm Kelleher could write off the NASA UFOs when he didn't understand the physics. You could see the waves pulsating from the craft in the ultraviolet sensitive camera photography. So I could see what they were doing by looking at the waves and putting in my galaxy clock wave model. So we're looking at craft that can cancel out gravity and mass to zero. And once you don't weigh anything, it takes nothing to go super fast. So that's why you don't see any energy signatures and super heavy ion thrust. And rocket thrust is ancient technology. None of these UFOs are using anything like that. But it wouldn't be impossible if there were people alive on Mars today for them to be using ion thrusters or rocket thrusters, which is the way a rocket works. Is you throw a hot propellant mass, and the heavier the propellant mass is and the faster it goes out, the faster the rocket goes in the other direction. So that's how rockets work. And you can see that clearly in the infrared cameras, as I mentioned. But the case of the Nomos in the prophecy, that the beings who apparently visited the pyramids regularly from the star Sirius, according to Robert Temple's research, they would return. The prophecy is that they would return, and there would be many of them in the sky. And we have, in the case of the Navy sighting, we also have the year 2004. In the year 2004, I was living in Los Angeles making my film Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs when I met a young man named Pat Usker, whom nobody knew at the time. And I introduced Pat Usker to everybody in ufology that I could, and also to Dan Aykroyd in person. And Pat had this amazing piece of footage from the same year of a UFO. It's in my Dan Aykroyd DVD, which is now online, free. And this UFO had a little, you could see the magnetic field spinning around it. And when we zoomed in Photoshop, we could see windows that looked very similar to these type of windows, portals, these kind of black ribbing spaces on the bottom of the Tic Tac. So it's possible that a lot of the California UFO wave are craft that are coming from the sea. Now, one time I was flying back from the island of Maui in Hawaii, and I sat next to this massive young Hawaiian man who was in the Navy. And he was so big, and I'm 6 feet and just less than an inch, 6 feet plus and a half an inch. And this guy, his shoulders are this wide. I can barely sit in my seat. And he started to tell me about him and his father, because we were talking about UFOs. And his father and him would go fishing off the islands at nighttime, and they would see craft come out of the sky and go and hover right above the water and go submerge into the water, and he could see them glowing under the ocean when they were fishing. So remember what I'm saying about this thing. Looks like a giant whale. It can outperform all of our aircraft, and then it can go it could probably float on the surface and then submerge, a submergible UFO. And we have lots of cases like that. There's lots of cases of the underwater UFOs. So I believe that's what we're looking at right here. You're looking at a picture of a UFO. Now, the most amazing thing about the ocean is 2/3 of this planet is ocean, approximately. And the Mariana Trench, the water is 35,000 feet deep. So that's over by, the Philippines in that region. So technically, off the coast of San Diego, the question is how far do these ETs build super strong structures that can withstand incredible pressures, because the weight of water at the bottom of the sea is so super massive that you have to be using structural materials to build domes or even small cities, under there, where these beings can be living and go undetected. So radar, which is microwaves, don't work in the ocean because they dissipate so quickly in the very dense salt water, they can't get a return signal. So radar works at the speed of light, but sonar, which is, you can use high pressure acoustics and get signals, from fair distances away. But the speed of the return signal is much slower than the speed of light. And the way these things move around, they could evade our Navy sonar so easily. So the ocean, in a way, is the safest place for them to exist. So when you go into cases like the Topanga, California UFO waves, I interviewed a college professor at Santa Monica College who saw helicopters chasing UFOs through Topanga Canyon in the 1990s, the early 1990s. He saw it with his own eyes. They could come right out of the ocean and visit us for a while and just go right back. And we would never know. Now, it's not that we don't know, but I think the problem with Bigelow's company and the way disclosure is happening is that they're trying to be too scientific, and they need to look at some ancient archaeology like I'm presenting here to understand what's going on. Is what Bigelow knows is, one, they have materials they're in possession of, which we don't know how they got. Because I'm going to go into another area next that's quite terrifying. And that is that our military has been shooting these things down for years. Now, the case of Roswell, according to my friend Boyd Bushman, who worked at Lockheed for over 25 years, is that his friend, who was a Navy doctor, was treating a young pilot who had just shot down the Roswell flying saucer with a super beam weapon. And I know from declassified Tesla Freedom of Information Act files on Nikola Tesla that the death ray designed by Tesla, which can annihilate an army of 100,000 soldiers at once and could shoot down enemy aircraft from 200 miles away. The death ray was in development at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base pre-Roswell. We have the dates. And so that means at the time of Roswell, the weapon would have been 2 years advanced from the dates I have on these FBI files. And in these Tesla FBI files, they name Maglich, the physicist that I'm working with, who's standing next to Glenn Seaborg, who's working with Glenn Seaborg, the chair of the Atomic Energy Commission. And plus many other Nobel Prize winning scientists were in the room with us many times. So do you understand what I'm saying here? Is that what's happened is Maglich is named in the FBI files. They're looking for him and his whole family because Maglich is from Yugoslavia, the same country as Tesla. And Maglich brought over documents and items of Tesla's to the United States. And he gets his PhD at MIT and became a full professor at Rutgers University. Becomes a co-discoverer of the Omega Meson. One of the last great discoveries in subatomic particle research was Louis Alvarez. And I'm in the vicinity of these physicists, and they have never seen propulsion like this. But yet whom has been in control of the crash retrievals? We know Roswell was shot down by a super beam weapon, according to Boyd Bushman at Lockheed. The weapon was developed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that's exactly where they took the Roswell flying saucer. Same place they took the weapon. The weapon was developed. So we know we have weapons that are off the charts to shoot them down. So Bigelow is claiming now he has pieces of alien spacecrafts. Either he was given pieces, or he has access to the Pentagon, who has access to weapons that shoot them down. Now I'm going to show you, I was on Coast to Coast AM recently about this, but I didn't get to show all these pictures. I have proof that the Space Shuttle Columbia was shot down by a super weapon. A super weapon. And first, this image here, I put up on the Coast to Coast AM website. These photographs are taken by a tourist in San Francisco, and I'm using them under the Fair Use Act that allows me to critique his photographs. And then later, I get images from an MIT alumni, remember I have connections, who sends me NASA's pictures of the same event. So this guy is using a small little Nikon camera. It was called an 800. It's not the D800, which is what I have. This was in February 1st, 2003. He's a tourist visiting, and he's in San Francisco. He has a tripod. This little camera does not have an automatic shutter. It doesn't have a motor drive. So he takes the first picture in the upper left, and you can see this thing corkscrewing in, and this streak going by is the space shuttle on this really crappy camera that he has. And it's streaking by at 12,500 miles an hour, which is like Mach 18. So, because it's in the upper atmosphere, the space shuttle can go that fast. And so notice how it comes in. It has to be going, I calculate, at least 5 times the speed of the space shuttle, so about 64,000 plus miles an hour, because it chases the shuttle and catches up to it. And notice the 90-degree turn. You can't turn like that at 64,000 miles an hour. You can't turn like that at 10,000 miles an hour. So the Minuteman missile is the fastest missile on the planet at 18,000 miles an hour, is still not fast enough to catch the shuttle. It would be a slow increase on 12.5. In seconds, it would be a very slow increase. But this thing does an elbow turn, which would destroy any missile. The G-forces would destroy the missile on a turn like that. Any missile made out of anything we know. And yet, in the second photograph, you see, now notice where the head of this thing is at right here on the left photograph. So when he takes the next picture, it has gained, and it's left its tracer trail behind it. It has gained in about maybe 2 seconds. It took him to take the second picture. It's gained, you know, another great distance, and it's chasing the head of the shuttle. Notice the head on this thing is curving and pointed right at the space shuttle in the second top right photo. And the third photo, it strikes the shuttle. So I count at least, 2, 4, 6 seconds, plus you have to count 2 seconds for the beginning of the incoming munition that's striking the space shuttle. Now, NASA went and posted in their investigation only the last photograph from the guy's camera, saying it was a super lightning strike coming from outer space. So super lightning strikes have tentacles coming off of them. I've never seen anything like this. They don't corkscrew like this, and they don't chase an object and hit it. And first of all, lightning strikes are 1/3 of the speed of light, the visible part. You would never see it. I shot video 30 frames a second, and I can see the lightning strike in 2 frames. So 1/15 of a second is the longest lightning strike I've ever recorded. NASA is claiming what is probably took 8 seconds for these 3 photographs, that the same lightning strike lasted 8 seconds. That is physically impossible. It is an absolute cover-up and lie. So the 4th image here is an image that is sent to me by an MIT alumni because the Air Force from Hanscom Air Force Base and several department heads at NASA were not allowed to see the tourist photos because Space Shuttle astronaut Tammy Jernigan in San Francisco at Lawrence Livermore Labs confiscates the tourist camera and his photos. She tells the San Francisco Chronicle they're an artifact of the guy's camera. Artifact of the guy's camera. Later, they change their view that it's a super lightning strike, but they only show you the last photo because that would make you believe that's a lightning strike. That's no lightning strike. I've never seen a lightning strike corkscrew like that. Change direction and go right angles. Lightning strikes come straight down, maybe a little bit sideways, but they don't go like this and then sideways and hit a target. And they can't last for 8 seconds. They can't even last for 1 full second. So this is pure BS. Now you're going to look at something really astounding. When you get into, okay, first of all, there's the clean shot of the first tourist image, second, third, 4th image. You can see it's purple in the 4th image very well, right? So, and then this cleaner shot, you can clearly see the coloring of the incoming was purple. And notice how the tracer is still there after 6 photographs. You can still see the tracer. So that's like 10, 12 seconds later, the lightning strike is supposedly still lingering in the sky. Impossible, impossible lie that NASA came up with. And this is how they covered it up. But see, then I get this series of images from MIT. And this is the first one. And this image shows the shuttle streaking by before the strike. And believe it or not, even though this is grainy, it's a very high-res image. So I bring it into Photoshop, and I'll show you what it looks like closer up. That's the moment of the strike. Let me go to my close-ups. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Don't worry. Close-up. So there's the close-up of the Columbia. And this is not pixelated. This thing reminds me of the Tic Tac, but from a lower angle. It's got an S-curve in it from the top. You can see it on the bottom. Either that or you're looking at 2 solar panels in some type of a military satellite in the middle. That is not the Columbia. And I'll show you an even closer close-up. I'm still not looking at pixels. I'm amazed. This is close-up number 2 I did. And look at this thing. That in no way resembles the Columbia. It has an S curve to it. Curvature. Okay? This isn't the space shuttle that was coming in that got hit that day. This is NASA's own image sent to me from MIT from their cameras. Okay, this is, look at the coloring of the halo around it, this purple and indigo blue light, purpley blue light off the very, very bright surface, right? So I don't know what this is, but it doesn't, I've looked at imagery of what the space shuttle looks like when it's in the air. And it really retains this shape no matter how far away you are from it. Okay, so at first I thought the 2 panels were the barn doors of the space shuttle, you know, the cargo bay doors, but those are way too small. The shuttle is way bigger than those doors. And when you look at the image again of the close-up, it doesn't, see, if you go back to your close-up number 2, if these 2 things were the barn doors, then the shuttle should be huge, right, around it, but it isn't. It's not there. So it's possible something happened that day that we can't even begin to imagine, right? So let's go to the images that were sent to me of the Columbia that day getting struck. Now this is from NASA's own cameras. I wonder how good our resolution is here on this recording, but you can see the incoming from a completely different angle, which is purple, hitting the Columbia. But to the right, which is ahead of its flight path, are 3 UFOs in a triangular formation. And they don't have any streaking, so they're not, there's no propulsion in these 3 objects that we would know of. They're not stars, because at shutter speeds that low, you'll never pick up stars. Otherwise, you'd see tons of them. This is from the camera. Is the image is JSC, which means Johnson Space Center, 2003. That's the year of the Columbia incident. They're sent to me from MIT. Is it possible the Columbia was hit multiple times by the incoming before it came apart? Or is it not even the Columbia? Did the Columbia land safely? And what was happening is they were shooting down some type of a UFO, and then they scattered debris, and to make it look like it was the Columbia. And they didn't want us to all be looking up at the sky and seeing something coming down, that they couldn't tell us that there was an ET war going on. Now, here's my other data. I interviewed a man named George Mosman who was in Dallas, Texas that day. I was in Sedona, Arizona, lecturing on the NASA UFOs that day. I remember the smell in the air. It was very toxic. There was a haze all over Arizona, because we were in the path of the supposed Columbia that came down. But George Mosman saw 2 purple UFOs that were saucer-shaped through his Zeiss binoculars from his lawyer's office in Dallas that day, as this was occurring. Okay, so all I can tell you is this is NASA's own photography. Let me see if I can blow this up a little more for you. And I'm not sure how good your resolution is on this recording, but there's your UFOs in your triangle formation right ahead. 1, 2, 3. They're spherical. They're definitely round. I don't see any streaking. I've tried brightening the images. I don't see any streaking on the 3 points of light ahead of Columbia getting hit. The streaking is the shuttle going by at 12,000 miles an hour, and the incoming has streaking. But the 3 points of light have no streaking. And we're right inside the Earth's atmosphere here, people. This is right inside of the atmosphere. It's the top of the atmosphere, right inside. There's lots of mass, lots of noble gases. There's, the upper atmosphere where the shuttle is coming in is got atmospheric conditions, so you're going to get streaking. Yet these 3 lights don't streak. This is their image. Okay. Most media, I've sent this to the New York Times. I've sent it to everyone in ufology that I think should look at it. And nobody can deal with this. They can't deal with this because this is NASA and the Space Shuttle Columbia. So I hope you can see in the video quality these 3 points of light. If you can't, you can email davidsereda@hotmail.com, and you can look on my Facebook wall and you can see those. I posted them there. You just got to go to my Facebook wall and you just search Space Shuttle Columbia in my timeline, and all the arguments will come up. People were trying to say NASA already proved that it was a super lightning strike, and here it is. Here's their investigation. 1 photograph, bottom left, all they showed. They didn't show the chase. They didn't measure the time of photography. They're completely lying. There's no way a lightning strike can last that long, and super lightning doesn't do this. It doesn't corkscrew like that. It fragments, and it comes at you in a third of the speed of light. So it's over in a flash. It doesn't last. So with that, we come to the question: why did Congress and 4 senators go to a private company, Bigelow Aerospace, and give him the contract to hire Louis Elizondo and the others, Colin Kelleher, a very, junior physicist. Possibly Hal Puthoff is involved, who's a very good physicist who believes in advanced propulsion technology and UFOs. I'm really surprised Hal Puthoff has had nothing to say, very little to say, other than in the disclosure of To the Stars Academy by Tom DeWong. Tom DeWong must work for Bigelow. He must work for him. He's removed and distanced himself from all of ufology. Tom DeWong has. He will not answer to me. He doesn't answer to anybody. He doesn't make appearances for anybody other than himself. Now, guess what their plan is? I watched the live presentation of To the Stars Academy just before this all got released. And there was Elizondo, the same man as the head of all disclosure in the New York Times and MSNBC, Rolling Stone. I mean, every newspaper in the world has covered this. And I'm telling you that what's really going on here is that in the past, this secret Air Force that works for the shadow black government has usurped and taken every crash retrieval there is. Congress, the president, have never had access to this technology, save Eisenhower. President Eisenhower was the only president who was able to see in. Kennedy could barely see in. He saw a little bit from what we know. You can go to Grant Cameron, presidential UFO. I'm sure you might have interviewed him from his take on the presidents. The presidents don't have access to this. So this is why they're doing it this way. This is why Senator Harry Reid decided to give a private corporation the data. So you can circumvent the shadow government. But guess what they're missing? They have little pieces of craft. And I can tell you what the materials these things are made out of are the key to the success of the anti-gravity of how the craft work. And I know this because I've done a lot of testing on materials myself. And I won't tell you everything I know, but I can tell you if you don't have the right material container for your UFO, it won't fly. And so what they want is to retrieve a saucer or a triangle or a tic-tac. What they call a tic-tac is really a whale-shaped craft. And the only way they're going to do it to get one to shoot down is, one, to get their hands on a weapon. And I mean a weapon like what took out the space shuttle. This is a real projectile. This is leaving a tracer that's lasting for minutes. The tracer is lasting. It's not disappearing like a lightning strike. So that means there's a real tracer. That means it's a munition, a hard weapon. But in the case of Boyd Bushman's and the Tesla death ray, there's no tracer. You couldn't see it. And I was personally shown by Boyd Bushman himself how that weapon works. It can take down anything. It can take down Kim Jong-un's missiles in no time. No problem. And I know exactly how it works. I'm not going to talk about it on the air. But I can tell you that what their mission is, what Tom DeWong announced, he's already raised over $2 million to build a free app that you can put in your phone, and wherever you live, you'll say, I just saw a UFO. Punch in the coordinates. The data goes to them, and they send their team to identify what it is, and if it's not one of our friendly private pilot or whatever commercial pilot, they're going to shoot it down. So you're going to be feeding them data to help them do their own crash retrieval, meaning shoot down the craft. We had an incident right here in Nelson, British Columbia last September the 5th where people, I saw it. I was at my deck, I saw a huge flash of light, but people I know who were outside saw this thing that looked like a fireball, and then it explodes into multicolored fireworks. Now, I've never seen a meteor explode into multicolored fireworks. And we're in a basement suite here, and the ground shook here for a full minute. The ground does not shake when a meteor streaks across the sky, period. Unless it's one massive object. But then it would you'd have a little sonic boom and it would be over. But the ground kept shaking. And that's because the pieces kept hitting in this region. So the next day I saw maps that the military had made where all the pieces probably landed in this region. And then we got a report from a geography professor at the local college that one of his students saw black unmarked helicopters on the runway in Canada, in Castlegar, British Columbia, because they were setting up to look for this thing. So somebody shot it down. This was no meteor, because you can tell from the color temperature of the burn what it's made out of. And when you see all those colors, that's a lot of different materials. It's not one material. So you can look up the color temperatures of different metals when they burn. And you can, I've done this for meteorites, to see, what color would a meteorite burn if it was iron. And most meteors are iron-based. And some of them have some other trace minerals in them. Some of them are ice. Of course, comets are ice carriers. But the ones that enter our atmosphere are usually containing iron and some other metals. But so they burn at a pretty consistent color temperature. I'm trying to remember the color that iron burns at. It's burn color when it hits the atmosphere at those temperatures. So this thing blew up like fireworks into multicolors and shook it. And you don't have Black Hawk helicopters show up to look for a meteorite. I'm sorry, you don't. So something hit the ground. And that's why the Earth shook for a full minute. It blew up. And I believe what's going on is, see, we have satellite sensors all over the planet. We have radar dishes everywhere. But we don't have enough eyes on these UFOs. So if this new program that Bigelow's running wants to retrieve a saucer, they have to have more eyes to know when there's a sighting. So you're going to be supplying them that data for free, and then they're going to go shoot down ET, and they're going to try and retrieve it if they're able to shoot it down. Now, according to my data on what took out the Space Shuttle Columbia on February 1st, 2003, or whatever it took out, because the photos revealed that that's not the Columbia that got hit. And I know we all believe what we saw on the TV, because the TV's God. TV's God. But they picked up pieces of the panels and the space shuttle and the tiles, and maybe the space shuttle got hit. And maybe
we have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Neil. And maybe what I'm seeing a picture of is something else that was up there, streaking by. But all I know is you look at the data, and there's a war going on. And I don't know if the war is us shooting them down because they're not supposed to be here, and we're trying to get our own crash retrieval that Congress can have and the Pentagon can have access to, because they don't have access to the Black Air Force. And the technology, according to the former head of Lockheed Skunk Works, the famous statement that we already have the technology to send ET back home, means that if the Black Division of our military has, speed of light and faster craft, the current Air Force can't touch them. Can't touch them. There's nothing the Pentagon has access to that can touch them. So that means if those guys are retrieving the remains of a subtle beginnings to an ET potential takeover of Earth. Because I had an hour conversation with Paul Hellyer, Minister of Defense Canada, recently on the phone. He believes there's enough evidence that there are ETs that may have permission to take Earth away from us, because we're doing a terrible job as custodians in protecting the environment, and that we don't deserve this planet anymore, and somebody else very high up, when you get up into the higher levels of UFOs, you get into the angelic thrones. The thrones transport the gods and the angels around, and the gods, goddesses, and angels around. And so eventually you get to a level that is way beyond the Greys, way beyond the Pleiadians, way above all of them. And all they have to do is give permission for somebody else to take this place over. And the last thing I'm going to say, if Bigelow is right, and the tall whites already have bases on the planet in Nevada, and they've been living here for over 1,000 years, then it's very possible they're preparing to take our planet from us. And because we don't deserve it, because we don't seem to care. But really, it's the technology that the black government possesses that could save the planet. So the argument is, with Stephen Greer's disclosure, is you're holding technology that could save the planet. And you don't want to share it because it will change everything. It will change the value of real estate, which will become worthless because you can build a home anywhere you want. You can laser rock and build pyramids and do anything you want. And you don't need these highways. You don't need rubber tires, and you don't need to burn fossil fuels. So this is a very intense situation we're in. To have disclosure now is planned. Somebody allowed it. Somebody very high up allowed this to happen. The black Air Force and the black government, shadow government, must be allowing this for a reason. We probably already have bases on Mars and the moons of many of our planets. But Earth is still precious, very, very valuable. And so I don't know where this is going to go next, but what I've demonstrated is there are weapons. Whether the Space Shuttle Columbia was a demonstration of a super weapon, I've seen these things with my own eyes when I worked for Department of Defense. I've seen handheld laser guns that actually work, not pistols, but long lasers. I worked on a brochure at Rand Corporation 13 years ago myself. And they had me come in and teach somebody how to make this brochure, and it was an instruction manual how to use a Star Wars based weapon by hand. So there are things going on that you can't even imagine. So I believe there are ETs living under the ocean that are probably mermen. They've been here for an awfully long time, and we're just figuring it out now. So thank you everyone for being here today. My website is my name, davidsereda.net. We have a lot of amazing technology and products for healing the body, re-energizing the body, and also tuning your space to a distant star system so that you can make your own contact and have your own contact experiences. So thank you very much, Neil, for having me here today.